Hi there, my name is Isha Morelli, and today I am going to show you guys how to perform an archival research project. So let's start off with some vocabulary. What exactly is archival research analysis? So it's looking at a genre over a period of time and seeing the differences to make an inference about the discourse community. What is a genre, you may ask? A genre, oh goodness, let me just rewrite that. Okay, sorry about that. But a genre is a means of responding to a situation. In this video, our genre is going to be ads from the Times of India, which is a newspaper, national newspaper of India, and we're going to be analyzing ads from the day that India gained its independence in 1947 to more recent editions to see if we can find similarities and differences between these ads from the different decades. The similarities are called non-negotiable conventions. So non-negotiable conventions are a set of rules that must be followed for something to be a genre. In this case, our genre, as I said before, is advertisements in the Times of India. So I encourage you now to pause the video and think of some components of advertisements that make them ads. Okay, so now that you have had some time to make a small mental note of what you think an ad needs to be an ad, let's look at some examples and see if we can find some similarities between them. The first thing that I noticed, this is the one from 1947, is that it has an eye-grabbing phrase that pulls the reader in. After that, I also see that there's a description describing the ad's purpose or exigency. Then I also see that they have images to make it a little easier for the readers to understand the purpose of the ad. So we see here, since it's an ad for a music box or radio, we see that they have a picture of the radio here, and they have a picture of their primary consumer, which seems to be an Indian housewife. So now let's look at one from 1960. So we see, again for this one, we have our eye-grabbing, eye-catching phrase or slogan. We have a description. It seems like they are selling tea. So we have a description of why they think that you need this tea. They have a picture of the tea box. And then they also have an image of the primary consumer, which seems to be groups of Indian women. Next one we're going to see is this one, which is from 1992. And we see here that we have a very bold title or phrase. We have description kind of trying to sell the product, which is obviously the exigency of this ad is to sell a product. Then we also have our logo that will be easy for you to spot in a store. So you can just pick it right up. Our last one is actually from 2010. This one's a little different from the other ones we've seen. It has a different exigency. We'll talk about that a little later. We have our kind of overall, like, what is this thing about title. We have a description going more in detail of what this ad is and its exigency. Then we also have some images to tell us more about it. Since it has the official seal of India, tells us that this is an official university. Now that we have discussed some similarities between these ads from 4 different decades, let's look at some differences, which are also known as negotiable conventions, and see how those relate to the changes in values and ideals of our discourse community. The first step of doing this is defining who the discourse community is. A discourse community is a community that reflects the same values. Now I want you to take a minute, pause the video, and consider who the discourse community is in this Times of India ad newspaper. At first glance, I would say that the discourse community for this genre is the general public of India. We will look more at the ads, analyze them, and see if our interpretation is correct or if it shifts between the different decades. The next step is to do secondary research and gain some context surrounding your genre in that certain time period. So, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but my ads are surrounded around women. So my research question through all this was, how does these ads show a shift in the discourse community's attitudes towards women in society? So in my example, we're going to be looking at women. So I will be providing some contextualization of women in India, since that is the primary focus of my specific analysis. So, women played a very important role in fighting for independence against Great Britain. During the years leading up to the Declaration of Independence, women were seen as equal to men, as they both had an equal role in India's success. When the Constitution of India was being drafted, they gave the women of India the same rights and privileges as men, and they were considered legal citizens. Though in the eyes of law they were considered equal to men, that wasn't always the case in households. Due to prevalent child marriages of girls having to marry before the age of 18, the national female literacy rate was at a low of 8.6%, and only 4.6% of girls were able to pursue higher education, which was from ages 11 to 14. Going back to our example from 1947, pull that up. Let me get rid of all this. Yeah, so going back to this example, this changes our inference of who our audience is for this ad. It was most likely not the women, because very few of them could read at the time. It can be inferred that the advertisement was directed towards the husband of these housewives. We see in the ad down here saying, "Give her a break," as if the wife is a servant instead of a wife. This description of what a typical day of a woman looks like tells us about the attitudes of this discourse community. We can see that the women were expected to handle all the housework and tend to the man's hand and foot. It can be inferred that through this description that women were treated as second-class citizens and workers of the men. It can be inferred that the society does not expect or want women to do anything else. This means that the discourse community for this newspaper ads during this time period was not women, but men who could read. We see a shift in conventions, however, over 10 years later in 1960. Let me pull that one up, get rid of all these marks. We see in this ad that it is now targeting women instead of their husbands. Unlike the previous ad, which is in second person, we see that this description is in third person, which tells us that it was no longer targeted to men, but women as well. As the audience of the ad has now changed from just men to now women too, we can infer a change in the discourse community. Now that we see ads directly targeted to women, we can infer that women were now part of the literate discourse community. This also tells us that the community was more open to women finishing school, as they are now able to read the ads and not just meant to stay at home and work from the age of 17. We also see that women are now active consumers in society. Since the ad was directed towards them, it suggests that they were able to go out and buy the product being sold themselves, unlike 10 years ago, where the men of the house were the only ones who could make purchases for the family. We see this trend continue into the 90s and 2000s, where the ads concerning, let me pull up the 1992 ad, where the ads concerning women consumers were no longer targeted at men, but women themselves. Actually, in the 1992 ad, where the conventions have been switched to second person towards women, which is something that we don't see in the first two examples. This tells us that women were gaining more and more freedom to make their own decisions. The exigency of this ad was to make women buy their Wonder Rug. So in order to make women buy their product, their ad was contingent on previous ads that did not talk to the women directly, and changed it so that women felt like they were in charge of what they wanted to buy. When looking at the discourse community's views of women in society from the late 1940s to now, we can see some changes and similarities. The difference can be seen in the images from 1942 ad and the 1960 ad. We see that the women in the 1960 ad are sitting around a table and socializing with one another, showing that women have leisure time. This is different from the first ad. Let me pull that one up, where the woman is portrayed as hard at work. This can be viewed in two different ways. It can be inferred that this ad is attempting to showcase the lives you could have if you bought their product. You could have leisure time to hang out with your friends. Or it could be seen as a shift of the ideals of the discourse community, where women hard at work in the kitchen all day was not as common as it was before, and she now has more time to herself. We also see that in this ad, in the description, it says, let me highlight it, societal women gather over a cup of tea. This is building a lifestyle that women will want to have. This shows us that women in this time period cared about their status in society and constantly wished to climb up the ladder, which also shows us that this discourse community valued your status in society. A similarity that one could notice between the 1947 ad and the 1992 ad was talking about women cleaning. Even though after 40 years, we see the ad is directed at women involving duties of the house such as cleaning. Although the 1942 ad made it seem that she was a servant and didn't have a choice of what she could and couldn't do, and the most recent ads made it seem like she had more control over her life, the role of a woman in the eyes of society hasn't changed much. This can be inferred because the ad in 1992 is explicitly directed to women, as we can see in this title right here, and not men. Because of this, we can infer that women were still the ones who were expected to take care of the cooking and cleaning in the household. Although the discourse community's views on women's roles in society hasn't changed much, we do see a change in opportunities available to them. In this 2010 ad for IIST and Aeronautic University, do you notice something different from the past examples that have been shown? Pause the video and see if you can explain the differences between the past examples and this one, which was printed less than 20 years after the 1992 ad. Now that you've had time to think about your response, let me walk you through my interpretation. There are no wrong answers when it comes to archival research and analysis. The analysis portion will be different for each person based on their own experiences and biases. So for me, the first thing that jumped out at me was that this ad had a different exigency than the past ads. Can you guess what the exigency of this one is? Yes, that's right. This is for a college application, not consumer products like we see in the previous ads. Not only that, but we can see a mention of women in this ad. This is the first ad that we see is not directly targeted at women, but men and women alike. This is a huge change, as in the past there were ads for men and ads for women, but now we see ads for men and women. Because of this, we can infer a shift in the discourse community of seeing women as equal to men and worthy of the same opportunities that men have. Although this is an example of equality between men and women, there is still one difference that distinguishes the two. It's the fact that women have to pay half the price of the application fee than men. You may portray this in different ways, but the way I see it is that there is a greater push to get more women in STEM fields than there was before. By lowering the admissions price, women For women, it is more likely that women will be able to apply, and this in a way helps open up new opportunities for them. This shows a huge change in the discourse community where women were no longer second-class citizens and now equal to men and are even more encouraged to compete with men, which was not the case in the past half-century. I think the 4 ads from different decades show a great shift in the ideals and perceptions of the discourse community, men but also women, on the roles of women in society. It started with an increase in the discourse community going from just men who were able to read English to women, as well as even a higher percentage of them going to school. From there, it just got better for women. They were able to take charge of what they want and had freedom to choose, which they didn't have in the 1940s. They were also towards more recent times encouraged to become professionals in STEM fields and compete with men. Although there are still some gender roles that we can see that haven't changed much, such as women doing all the housework, with more education and freedom, women are one step closer to becoming complete equals to men. I hope my example of an archival research analysis was helpful for you as you begin your journey. My last piece of advice would be to go with your gut. A large portion of this project is to input your own analysis on the source, not the analysis of someone else. Because of this, I suggest refraining from reading too many secondary sources, as that will shift your bias one way or another from what it was originally. Anyways, this is the end of this video. I hope to see you next time.